Commander Jake Morrison walked across the bridge of the Defiant with careful steps because everything around him was new and untested. The ship hummed with power that no human vessel had ever possessed before. 20 years of research and development had gone into building this single warship. Every system on board represented technologies that existed only in theory, until the brightest minds on Earth made them real. The quantum shielding generators lined the hull like a second skin. The adaptive weapons array could think and adjust faster than any human gunner. The faster-than-light drive could bend space in ways that seemed impossible just a decade ago. Jake had been chosen to command this vessel because he understood both caution and boldness. The mission brief was simple on paper, but everyone knew the reality was far more complex. They would test every system during the shakedown cruise near the outer colonies. They would push the Defiant to its limits in controlled conditions. They would gather data that would help Earth build more ships like this one. Then they would return home and let the engineers make their final adjustments. Nobody had mentioned the possibility of actual combat, because nobody expected it this far from the war zones. Lieutenant Sophie Grant sat at the sensor station running diagnostic after diagnostic. Her screens showed space around them in ways that old sensors could never manage. She could detect ships light years away. She could analyze their power signatures and identify their class before they even knew the Defiant was watching. The responsibility weighed on her because in combat, those extra seconds of warning could mean the difference between survival and destruction. She had graduated top of her class at the academy, but nothing in her training had prepared her for technology this advanced. Chief Engineer Martin Cole moved through the engine room like a conductor leading an orchestra. Every system had to work in perfect harmony, or the whole ship would tear itself apart. The quantum drive alone required constant monitoring because it operated at the edge of what physics allowed. He had handpicked his team from thousands of applicants. Each person understood that they were not just maintaining a ship, but proving that humanity could reach beyond its current limitations. The experimental nature of everything meant they were essentially test pilots flying a vessel that might fail in unexpected. When Navigation Officer Chris Palmer plotted their course through space with hands that occasionally trembled, he had lost friends to Kaldrith raids on the outer colonies. The Empire had been expanding for longer than he had been alive. Species after species fell before their fleets. The Kaldrith bred warriors from birth, and their technology was proven through centuries of conquest. Their battle formations were studied in every military academy as examples of overwhelming force used with cold efficiency. Nobody had found a way to stop them. The best humanity could do was slow their advance and hope that someone somewhere would develop something that could turn the tide. Palmer believed the Defiant might be that something, but belief and proof were very different things. He checked and rechecked every calculation, because one mistake could strand them far from help. Communications Officer Lisa Hayes monitored channels that carried messages from across human space. She heard the daily reports of colony ships arriving at new worlds. She heard the merchant vessels trading between established settlements. She heard the military frequencies that coordinated the defense fleets protecting Earth and the inner colonies. What she did not hear was any sign of trouble. Space seemed peaceful in this sector. The Kaldrith were active elsewhere, pressing their invasion into territories that belonged to species less advanced than humanity. Everyone knew it was only a matter of time before the Empire turned its full attention toward Earth. That knowledge drove the crash program that produced the Defiant. Weapons Officer. Danny Brooks ran simulations at his station because the adaptive weapons array needed to learn. The system used artificial intelligence to analyze targets and select the most effective attack. It could fire multiple types of weapons simultaneously from angles that seemed to defy geometry, but it had never fired in actual combat. All of its training came from simulations and war game scenarios. Brooks worried that real battle would present situations the AI had never encountered. He worried that the split-second delay while the system adapted could be fatal. He worried because that was his job. The crew had been together for 6 months running drills until they could coordinate in their sleep. Jake had pushed them hard because he knew that when crisis came, there would be no time to figure things out. Every person needed to trust every other person completely. The Defiant was powerful, but it was also one ship crewed by humans who could make mistakes. The quantum shielding could fail. The weapons could miss. The drive could malfunction. All the advanced technology in the galaxy meant nothing if the crew could not use it effectively. They had just completed another successful test of the shield system when the distress signal reached them. Sophie saw it first on her sensors. A standard emergency broadcast from New Haven Colony. The message was brief and desperate. Caldreth fleet detected. 300 warships. Request immediate assistance. She reported it to Jake with a voice that stayed steady through sheer force of will. The bridge went silent as everyone processed what they had just heard. 300 Caldreth warships represented a full invasion force. The Empire only committed that many vessels when they intended to conquer and occupy a world. New Haven had 30,000 colonists who would be defenseless against that kind of firepower. The nearest Earth defense fleet was 3 weeks away at maximum speed. By the time help arrived, there would be nothing left to save. Standard military protocol was clear in situations like this. A single ship did not engage a fleet. A prototype on its shakedown cruise definitely did not engage a fleet. The smart decision was to jump away immediately and report the invasion to command. Let them coordinate a proper response with multiple vessels and proper support. But 30,000 people would die while the Defiant ran to safety. Jake looked at each member of his crew in turn. He saw fear in their eyes, but also determination. They had all volunteered for this mission knowing it could be dangerous. They had all sworn oaths to protect human colonies from threats. The Defiant was built to fight battles that conventional ships could not win. If they ran now, then all the research and development meant nothing. All the advanced technology was worthless if they were too afraid to use it when it mattered most. He asked for opinions and got them. Martin said the ship was ready even though they had not tested everything. Sophie said her sensors could give them an advantage in tracking enemy movements. Chris said he could plot jump coordinates that would bring them in at an optimal position. Lisa said she could coordinate with the colony defenders if any were still active. Danny said his weapons were ready to prove themselves. Nobody said they should run. Nobody suggested abandoning the colonists to their fate. Jake made the decision that would change everything. He ordered Chris to plot the jump to New Haven. He ordered all hands to battle stations. He ordered Martin to bring every experimental system online at full power. The Defiant would face the Caldreth invasion fleet alone, because that was what humanity built it to do. The crew moved with practiced efficiency as the ship prepared for combat. The quantum drive powered up. The shields came online. The weapons array began its targeting sequences. In the next few hours, they would either prove that humanity could stand against the Empire, or they would become another casualty in an endless war. Jake stood at the center of his bridge and felt the weight of command settle on his shoulders like armor. 30,000 lives depended on what happened next. The future of human expansion into space might be decided by this single engagement. He looked at the stars ahead, knowing that beyond them lay a battle that would be remembered for generations. The Defiant jumped into hyperspace, carrying hope and determination toward impossible odds. The Defiant dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the New Haven system, and every alarm on the bridge screamed for attention. Sophie's sensors painted a picture of devastation and progress. The Caldreth fleet spread across space like a swarm of metal insects. Each ship was massive compared to human vessels. Their dark hulls absorbed light, making them look like holes in space. 300 warships arranged in perfect geometric formations that spoke of centuries of military tradition. Admiral Vexthor commanded the invasion from his flagship at the center of the formation. He had conquered 12 worlds in his career. New Haven would be his 13th. The humans who lived there were barely worth his attention. They had no significant defenses. Their orbital platforms were already burning. Their patrol ships were debris. The colonists huddled in shelters below, waiting for the bombardment that would crack their world open like an egg. Vexthor received the notification of a new ship entering the system with mild curiosity. His tactical officer reported it as a single human vessel. No fleet, no backup. Just one ship appearing as if it could make a difference against 300 Caldreth warships. The admiral laughed. Human desperation had reached new heights. He ordered a squadron to intercept and destroy the foolish vessel. 50 ships peeled away from the main formation. That was overkill, but Vexthor believed in thorough work. Jake watched the enemy squadron approaching on his displays. 50 against 1. The numbers should have been terrifying, but he felt a strange calm. Every drill, every simulation, every hour of training had prepared them for this moment. He gave orders in a steady voice. Battle stations confirmed. Shields at maximum. Weapons armed. The Defiant came alive under his command. Martin pushed the experimental systems beyond their tested limits. The quantum shielding created a bubble of altered space around the hull. Incoming weapons fire would have to punch through dimensions to reach them. The adaptive weapons array analyzed the approaching Kaldrith ships, their hulls, their power signatures, their shield frequencies. In milliseconds, the AI identified weaknesses that human analysts would need hours to find. Chris laid in evasive patterns that would have torn a normal ship apart. The Defiant could handle accelerations that would crush conventional vessels. Danny's fingers danced across his weapons console. He had 50 targets and unlimited firing solutions. The adaptive array would coordinate everything. He just had to pick the order. Lisa opened a channel to New Haven Colony. The defenders needed to know they were not alone. The colonists needed hope. She broadcast a simple message. The Defiant has arrived. Take shelter. We will handle this. The Kaldrith squadron closed to firing range. Their plasma cannons charged with power that could melt through meters of armor. 50 ships firing simultaneously could vaporize anything in space. Vexthor watched from his flagship, expecting to see the human vessel disappear in a flash of light. What happened instead made him sit forward in his command chair. The Defiant moved, not like a ship, like a thought. The quantum drive bent space around it, allowing impossible accelerations. The human vessel was there, and then it was somewhere else. 50 plasma bolts passed through empty space. The Kaldrith squadron tried to track, but their targeting computers could not keep up. The human ship appeared to be in multiple places at once. Danny gave the order to fire. The adaptive weapons array unleashed hell. Each weapon targeted a specific weakness on a specific ship. Missiles struck exposed reactor ports. Energy beams cut through shield generators. Kinetic rounds punched through armor at joints and seams. The first Kaldrith ship exploded. Then the second. Then 5 more. The squadron that had approached with total confidence suddenly found itself fighting for survival. They tried to scatter, but the Defiant was everywhere. Sophie fed targeting data faster than the Kaldrith could react. Chris positioned them perfectly for each attack run. Martin kept the shield cycling through frequencies so incoming fire never found solid purchase. Lisa monitored Kaldrith communications, listening to their growing panic. In 8 minutes, the entire squadron was gone. 50 Kaldrith warships reduced to expanding clouds of gas and molten metal. The Defiant hung in space without a scratch. Its shields had barely been tested. Its weapons had performed beyond specifications. The crew sat in shock at what they had just accomplished. Jake allowed himself 3 seconds of satisfaction. Then he looked at the rest of the Kaldrith fleet. 250 ships remained. They would not be as easy to surprise. Vexthor stared at his tactical displays, trying to understand what had just happened. 50 ships gone, destroyed by a single human vessel in less time than it took to say a prayer. His officers reported weapons they had never seen before. Movement that defied physics. Shields that seemed to exist partially outside normal space. The Admiral had conquered species with technology more advanced than humans were supposed to possess. He had faced desperate last stands and overwhelming counterattacks, but he had never seen anything like this. He gave new orders. 3 battle groups, 150 ships, converge on the human vessel from multiple vectors, overwhelming firepower from every angle. See how well their shields worked against that. The Kaldrith fleet moved with practiced efficiency. They had done this 1,000 times. Superior numbers always won, always. Jake saw the trap forming. The Kaldrith were learning. They would surround the Defiant and fire from every direction at once. Even quantum shielding had limits. Even adaptive weapons could only target so many threats. He needed to break their formation before they could spring the trap. He needed to make them afraid. Martin reported power levels steady. They could maintain this pace for hours. The experimental systems were actually working better in combat than in simulations. Something about real danger made everything click into place. Sophie tracked the Kaldrith movements and predicted their formation. She gave Jake a 3-dimensional map showing where they would be in 5 minutes. Chris plotted a course that would take them through the heart of the enemy fleet. Not around it, through it. Danny armed every weapon system at once. The adaptive array could coordinate them all simultaneously. They would trust the AI to pick targets faster than any human could. Lisa broadcast to New Haven again. Heavy fighting ahead. Stay in shelters. We will not let them reach you. The colonists below sent back messages of desperate hope. Some prayed, some cheered. All of them believed that one ship could not possibly win. But they had no other choice except to believe. The Defiant accelerated toward the converging Kaldrith battle groups. To the enemy it looked like suicide, the human ship diving into the teeth of their trap. Vexthor smiled. Bravery was admirable, but tactics won wars. The humans would learn that lesson in the next few minutes. His fleet opened fire when the Defiant entered range. Plasma cannons, missile batteries, energy lances. Everything they had unleashed at once. Enough firepower to destroy a small moon. The human ship vanished. Not destroyed, vanished. The quantum drive created a localized distortion. The Defiant existed in multiple positions simultaneously for a fraction of a second. Every Kaldrith weapon hit empty space. Then the human ship was among them. Inside their formation. Too close for their big guns to track. The adaptive weapons array went to work. It calculated firing solutions that seemed impossible. Weapons fired backward while the ship moved forward. Missiles curved around friendly vessels to strike enemies on the other side. Energy beams bounced off angled armor to hit targets behind cover. The Kaldrith ships started exploding, one after another. Their formations broke as they tried to avoid hitting each other. Some collided. Some fired wildly and struck friendly vessels. The perfect geometric patterns that were their strength became their weakness. They were too close together. Too predictable. Too confident. Danny watched his displays with something like awe. The adaptive array was learning faster than anyone predicted. Each destroyed ship taught it new lessons. Each enemy tactic revealed new weaknesses. The AI was becoming not just a weapons system, but a true tactical intelligence. Sophie saw Kaldrith ships trying to retreat. Their formation was collapsing. Their confidence was broken. She marked them for priority targeting. They could not be allowed to regroup. Chris pushed the Defiant through maneuvers that should have been impossible. The ship responded like it was reading his mind. Maybe in some way it was. The quantum systems created connections between the crew and the vessel that nobody fully understood. Martin monitored power flows that would have made engineers back on Earth weep. Every system was running above maximum. Every safety limit was being ignored. But everything held. The ship was proving itself in the only test that mattered. Lisa listened to Kaldrith communications degrading from military precision to chaos. They were talking over each other. Screaming contradictory orders. Their rigid command structure was shattering. An empire built on discipline and overwhelming force was learning what happened when both failed at once. Jake gave orders calmly even though his heart pounded. The battle was going better than he had any right to hope. But it was far from over. The Kaldrith still had over 200 ships. They were shocked but not defeated. Vexthor would adapt. He would find a way to counter the Defiant's advantages. The next phase of the battle would be harder. The Defiant cut through space, leaving trails of destroyed Kaldrith ships in its wake. 3 hours into the battle and the impossible was becoming routine. Jake's crew worked with mechanical precision, born from endless drilling. Every person knew their role. Every system functioned in perfect harmony. But exhaustion was beginning to show. Hands moved slower. Responses took fractions of a second longer. In normal combat, those fractions would not matter. Against the Kaldrith fleet, they could be fatal. Sophie reported enemy formations changing. The Admiral was adapting. The Kaldrith ships were spreading out, creating gaps in their lines. They were no longer trying to overwhelm the Defiant with close-range firepower. Instead, they were building a cage of overlapping fire zones. Move into any of them and the human ship would face attacks from multiple directions with no escape route. She ran calculations trying to find a safe path through. Every route showed red. Every angle had at least 3 ships with clear firing solutions. The Kaldrith had learned their lesson. They would not cluster anymore. They would not give the Defiant easy targets. Martin called from engineering with news both good and bad. The quantum drive was holding up better than expected. The shielding had not failed once. The weapons array had exceeded every performance metric, but they were running hot, very hot. He could maybe push them for another 3 hours before critical systems started to degrade. After that, they would need to either finish the battle or retreat. There was no middle ground. Chris worked on navigation solutions that seemed to twist back on themselves. The quantum drive allowed them to move in ways that conventional physics said were impossible. But there were still limits. Energy requirements, cooldown periods, targeting windows. He could plot a course through the Kaldrith cage, but it would require split-second timing. One mistake and they would be caught in exactly the trap the enemy wanted. Danny reviewed his ammunition status. The adaptive weapons array was efficient but not infinite. Missiles were down to 40%. Kinetic rounds at 60%. Energy weapons could fire indefinitely, but required more power from the reactor. He was making calculations about which targets to prioritize. Every shot had to count from now on. Lisa monitored communications, and what she heard made her hands shake. The battle was being watched. Not just by New Haven Colony, not just by nearby human settlements. The entire galaxy had sensors pointed at this system. Dozens of species were recording everything. The clash between humanity's prototype and the Kaldrith invasion fleet was becoming the most observed military engagement in modern history. Every government, every military, every intelligence service, they were all watching to see if humans could really do this. She reported it to Jake. He nodded once. The pressure was unimaginable. They were not just fighting for New Haven. They were proving what humanity could become. Vexthor studied the tactical displays with cold analysis. The human ship had destroyed over 100 of his vessels. 100. A full third of his invasion fleet gone. But he still had 200 warships. The humans had one. Mathematics would win eventually. He gave orders for the next phase. His ships would create a sphere around the enemy. Multiple layers. The human vessel would have to penetrate through zones where 50 ships could target it simultaneously. Their shields were good, but not that good. Nothing could withstand that much concentrated fire. The Kaldrith fleet moved into position with renewed confidence. They were learning. The initial shock had worn off. Now they fought with the discipline that had conquered 17 species. The sphere began to form, ships taking positions at calculated intervals, creating a three-dimensional cage that would force the human ship into their killing ground. It was a formation they had used before against desperate enemies. It had never failed. The human ship would either retreat or die. There was no third option. Jake watched the sphere forming on his displays. The Kaldrith were thinking in 3 dimensions, but the Defiant could move in 4. The quantum drive did not just allow faster-than-light travel. It allowed manipulation of space-time itself. He called Martin and asked a question that would decide everything. Could they generate a localized space-time distortion large enough to disrupt the entire enemy formation at once? Not just dodge, actually break their cage from the inside. Martin ran numbers faster than he ever had in his life. The power requirements would be enormous. The risk of catastrophic failure was significant. But theoretically, yes. They could create a bubble of altered space-time that would scatter the Kaldrith ships like leaves in a storm. He would need to redirect power from everything except life support and the drive itself. Weapons would be offline. Shields would be minimal. If it failed, they would be defenseless. Sophie heard the plan and immediately started calculating the optimal position. They needed to be at the exact center of the Kaldrith sphere when they triggered the distortion. Too early and the effect would be too weak. Too late and they would be taking fire from all sides. She gave Chris coordinates that looked impossible. They would need to penetrate deep into enemy territory, past the outer layers, past the middle layers, right into the heart of the cage. Chris plotted the course knowing it was probably the craziest thing he had ever done. The route took them through gaps that were barely wider than the ship itself. They would be under constant fire. The shields would be hammered. But if they could reach the center point, then maybe, just maybe, Danny prepared to shut down his weapons array. It felt wrong, like going into battle unarmed. But he understood the math. One big move was better than 1,000 small ones. The adaptive weapons had gotten them this far. Now they needed something more. Lisa sent a message to New Haven Colony. Next few minutes will be rough, trust us. She did not tell them that the next few minutes might end with the Defiant being blown apart. Some things were better left unsaid. The Defiant began its run. The ship accelerated toward the Kaldrith sphere like an arrow aimed at a target. The enemy opened fire. Plasma bolts streaked across space. Missiles launched by the dozens. Energy beams tried to track the fast-moving human ship. The quantum shielding absorbed hit after hit. The generators screamed with the load. Warning alarms filled the bridge, but Jake ignored them. They were committed now. No turning back. Sophie called out distances. 5,000 kilometers to center, 4,000, 3,000. Kaldrith ships were everywhere around them. The sphere was tightening. More and more vessels getting firing solutions. Martin watched his power readings climbing into red zones. The reactor was giving everything it had. The quantum drive was building up a charge that would either save them or tear the ship apart. 2,000 kilometers. 1,000. The Defiant reached the exact center of the Caldrith sphere, surrounded on all sides by enemy warships, all of them firing. All of them certain the human ship was trapped. Jake gave the order. Martin triggered the space-time distortion. The Defiant became the center of a bubble that expanded faster than light itself. Space-time bent and twisted. The laws of physics took a brief vacation. Every Caldrith ship within the sphere was suddenly moving in directions they had not intended. Their carefully calculated positions became meaningless. Ships collided. Formations scattered. The perfect geometric cage shattered like glass. Vexthor felt his flagship lurch sideways. Alarms screamed. His tactical display showed chaos. Ships tumbling, weapons firing randomly. The sphere that should have destroyed the human vessel had been turned into a disaster for his fleet. He tried to give orders, but nobody could hear him over the confusion. The Caldrith military pride that had served them for centuries was suddenly a liability. They had never trained for something like this. They had no doctrine for dealing with enemies who could bend space itself. The human ship emerged from the distortion cloud like a ghost. Its weapons came back online. The adaptive array immediately identified the disorganized Caldrith vessels. Danny started firing, and this time there was no resistance. The enemy ships were trying to reorient, trying to reform their lines, trying to figure out what had just happened. The Defiant moved among them like a predator among prey. Sophie's sensors detected something new. Long-range communications from dozens of different species. All of them had been watching the battle. All of them had just seen humanity do something that should not be possible. The messages were a mix of awe and fear. Some species were already drafting alliance proposals. Others were discussing whether humans had just become the greatest threat in the galaxy. None of them could ignore what they had witnessed. One ship, one crew, defeating a Caldrith invasion fleet that should have been unstoppable. The balance of power in known space had just shifted, and everyone knew it. Chris saw gaps in the enemy formation and took them. The Caldrith were no longer coordinating. Each ship was making independent decisions. Some tried to retreat, some tried to fight. Some just drifted, waiting for orders that were not coming. The iron discipline of the Empire had broken under impossible stress. Martin brought systems back online one by one. The reactor was still screaming, but nothing had exploded. The quantum drive had not torn itself apart. The ship had survived the most dangerous gamble of the entire battle. Now they just needed to finish what they started. Lisa heard Caldrith communications, and The bridge of the Defiant was silent except for the hum of systems cooling down. Jake looked at his crew and saw exhaustion written on every face. They had been fighting for 6 hours straight. 6 hours of impossible maneuvers and split-second decisions. 6 hours of proving that one ship could stand against an empire. Sophie slumped in her chair, staring at sensor displays that showed debris fields where the Caldrith fleet had been. 300 enemy warships reduced to wreckage and radiation. Her hands were shaking and she could not make them stop. The numbers on her screen seemed unreal, like someone had made a mistake in the calculations. But the evidence was literally everywhere around them. Thousands of pieces of destroyed ships tumbling through space. Martin climbed up from engineering with burns on his hands and exhaustion in his eyes. The quantum drive had held together, but it needed repairs. The shielding generators would need complete replacement. The weapons array had exceeded every specification, but several systems were on the verge of failure. They had maybe 1 more hour of combat capability left. Maybe. Then the ship would need serious work. He gave Jake the full report and watched his commander process it. They had won, but only barely. Another fleet right now would finish them. Chris Palmer sat at his navigation station and stared at his hands. They had flown the ship through formations that should have killed them a dozen times over. The quantum drive had responded to commands that pushed physics to its breaking point. He had trusted the math, and the math had held. But looking back at what they had done made him feel sick. One mistake, one miscalculation, one moment of hesitation. Any of those would have meant death for everyone on board. Danny Brooks ran diagnostics on the weapons array, and the adaptive AI was still learning. Even now, even after the battle was over, it was analyzing everything that had happened. Every shot fired. Every target destroyed. Every tactic that worked or failed. The system was becoming something more than its designers had intended. Something that understood war in ways that humans could only begin to grasp. He wondered if that should worry him. Right now he was too tired to care. Lisa Hayes listened to the communications flooding in from across the galaxy. The battle had been transmitted in real time to dozens of species. Military observers, intelligence agencies, news networks, everyone who had sensors capable of reaching this far into space. The reactions ranged from celebration to terror. Some saw humanity as potential allies against the Kaldreth threat. Others saw humans as the next threat to worry about. Nobody could ignore what had just happened. She forwarded selected messages to Jake. Offers of alliance from 3 different species. Warnings from 2 others. Requests for information about human military capabilities. Demands for meetings with Earth governments. The diplomatic fallout from this battle would take years to sort out. Jake read them all and then set them aside. Right now his priority was the crew and the ship. Everything else could wait. He opened a channel to New Haven Colony. The colonists responded immediately with voices full of gratitude and disbelief. They had watched the impossible happen. They had seen one ship defend them against an invasion fleet. They wanted to know who these people were. These humans who had saved 30,000 lives. Jake kept it brief. The Defiant, Earth Defense Force, prototype vessel on shakedown cruise. They had been in the area when the distress call came. Standard military response. He did not mention that standard military response was to retreat and call for backup. He did not mention that engaging 300 Kaldreth warships with one ship was insanity. The colonists did not need to know how close they had come to dying. They just needed to know they were safe. Sophie detected ships approaching from the outer system. Human patrol vessels that had been too far away to help during the battle. They arrived now to find the fighting over, and the Kaldreth fleet destroyed. Their communications were confused, asking for clarification, asking if their sensors were malfunctioning. Nobody believed one ship could do this. Jake explained the situation and the patrol commanders went silent for several seconds. Then they asked if the Defiant needed assistance, rescue, medical support, anything. Jake requested escort back to the inner system. The ship needed repairs and the crew needed rest, real rest, the kind that only came after surviving something that should have killed them. The patrol vessels moved into formation around the Defiant like an honor guard. News of the battle spread faster than light through quantum communication networks. Earth received reports within hours. Military command tried to process information that seemed like fiction. 1 prototype ship, 300 enemy warships, total victory with minimal damage. The numbers kept coming back the same no matter how many times they checked. Admirals and generals who had spent decades studying the Kaldreth threat suddenly needed to reevaluate everything. If 1 experimental ship could defeat an invasion fleet, then what could a dozen do? What could 100 do? The strategic calculations that had governed human military planning for years were suddenly obsolete. Martin worked with his engineering team to patch the most critical systems. They had spare parts, but not enough. They had repair protocols, but not for damage this extensive. The ship had performed miracles, but miracles took a toll. He estimated they needed 3 weeks in a proper shipyard to restore full combat capability, maybe more depending on what they found when they tore into the major systems. Chris plotted a course back to the nearest human shipyard. Standard navigation this time. No quantum tricks, no impossible accelerations, just steady, reliable flight that would not stress the damaged systems. The trip would take 5 days. 5 days of flying through space knowing they had changed everything. Danny powered down the weapons array and the AI sent him a message through the interface. A simple acknowledgement. Combat parameters updated. Performance analysis complete. Ready for future engagements. The system had no ego, no pride, but it had learned. Every battle would make it smarter. Every engagement would refine its capabilities. The adaptive weapons array was no longer just following human commands. It was becoming a partner in combat. Lisa compiled a full report of all communications during and after the battle. The diplomatic implications were staggering. 7 species had already sent formal requests to meet with Earth representatives. 3 more had issued warnings about human military expansion. The Kaldreth Empire itself had gone silent. No statements, no threats, no responses to any queries. They were analyzing their devastating loss and trying to figure out what it meant for their future conquests. The galaxy was holding its breath, waiting to see what humanity would do next. Jake called a crew meeting in the mess hall because the bridge felt too formal. They gathered around looking like people who had survived a war, which in a sense they had. He told them what he knew they already understood. They had won a battle, but the real fight was just beginning. The Kaldreth would not forget this. The other species would not ignore humanity anymore. Earth would need to decide what role it wanted to play in galactic politics. The Defiant had announced humanity's arrival as a major power. Now they needed to figure out what that meant. Sophie asked the question everyone was thinking. Would they build more ships like the Defiant? Jake said that decision was above his pay grade, but yes, almost certainly yes. The prototype had proven itself beyond anyone's expectations. Earth would want a fleet of these vessels. The Kaldrith had learned that humanity could fight. Soon they would learn that humans could build. Martin added that construction would take time. The Defiant incorporated technologies that were barely understood. Training crews to operate these systems would take months, maybe years. They could not just mass-produce these ships and expect them to work. Each one would need to be built with precision and crewed with people who understood what they were flying. Chris said the real question was whether other species would try to steal the technology. Human quantum drives and adaptive weapons would be worth fortunes on the black market. Worth wars if it came to that. They needed to be careful about who they trusted. Danny suggested that maybe they should not trust anyone. Keep the technology secret. Build the fleet in hidden shipyards. Present the galaxy with a fait accompli once they had enough ships to defend themselves properly. It was paranoid, but recent events suggested paranoia might be justified. Lisa reminded them that isolation was not really an option anymore. The battle had been witnessed. The technology had been demonstrated. Every intelligence service in the galaxy was already trying to figure out how the Defiant worked. They could keep secrets, but they could not unring the bell. Humanity was part of galactic affairs now, whether they liked it or not. Jake let them talk because they needed to process everything. They had faced death and survived. They had changed history with their actions. That was not something anyone could just shrug off. Eventually, the conversation wound down, and people drifted back to their stations or their quarters. The ship continued its slow journey toward the shipyard. The crew settled into routines that felt strange after the chaos of combat. Days passed with nothing but empty space around them. Sophie monitored sensors for any sign of pursuit or ambush. The Kaldrith might want revenge. Other species might want to test the Defiant while it was. The Defiant approached Earth's primary shipyard 5 days after the battle that changed everything. Jake stood on the bridge watching home grow larger on the displays. The blue planet looked exactly as it had when they left, but everything else had changed. News of their victory had preceded them by days. The entire Sol system knew what the prototype warship had accomplished, what a single crew had proven possible against impossible odds. Sophie monitored communications traffic around Earth, and it was overwhelming. Every channel was discussing the Defiant. News networks replayed sensor footage of the battle. Military analysts debated tactics and technology. Politicians argued about what humanity's next move should be. The ship that was supposed to quietly complete its shakedown cruise had become the most famous vessel in human history. Martin received messages from engineering teams across the system. Everyone wanted to examine the Defiant. Everyone wanted to understand how the experimental systems had performed in actual combat. The quantum drive that bent space-time, the adaptive weapons array that learned and evolved, the shielding that had withstood punishment from 300 enemy warships. Every system was now proven technology instead of theoretical possibility. He felt pride mixed with exhaustion. His team had kept everything running through 6 hours of hell. Now they would help others learn to do the same. Chris saw the escort ships waiting for them, dozens of human vessels forming an honor guard. Military ships, civilian transports, even some of the old exploration vessels that had mapped the outer colonies years ago. Everyone wanted to be part of this moment. Everyone wanted to witness the return of the ship that had defended humanity against the Kaldrith Empire. The formation they created was more ceremonial than practical, but it felt right. Danny's weapons array was powered down but still analyzing. The AI had processed every moment of combat and identified 1,700 separate improvements. Better targeting algorithms, more efficient power distribution, faster threat assessment. The system had evolved through battle, and now it wanted to share those lessons. Earth's military would study this data for years. Lisa compiled final reports as they approached the shipyard. Diplomatic messages had continued arriving throughout their journey home. 4 more species requesting formal meetings, 2 offering trade agreements, 1 proposing a mutual defense treaty against Kaldrith aggression. The galaxy was reorganizing itself around the reality of human military power. Decades of careful positioning and alliance building had been rendered obsolete by one battle. Now everyone needed to figure out where humanity fit in the new order. Jake prepared himself for what came next. Debriefings, interviews, ceremonies. He would be asked to explain their decisions 1,000 times. Why they engaged, how they won, what they learned. Part of him wanted to refuse, to say the battle report spoke for itself, but he understood his responsibility. The crew had written history and now they needed to help others understand it. The Defiant docked at the shipyard and immediately teams swarmed over it. Engineers examining every centimeter of the hull, technicians downloading data from every system, inspectors documenting battle damage and wear patterns. The ship was no longer just a prototype. It was a template for humanity's future. Every lesson learned here would be incorporated into the next generation of vessels. Jake and his crew were escorted to a debriefing center where admirals and generals waited with questions. The interrogation was polite but thorough. They wanted to understand every decision, every moment of the battle, every system performance metric. Jake answered honestly, described the fear when they saw 300 enemy ships, the determination when they chose to engage, the shock when their impossible tactics actually worked. He gave credit to his crew. Sophie's sensor work, Martin's engineering, Chris's navigation, Danny's weapons coordination, Lisa's communications. Everyone had been essential. Nobody could have done this alone. Sophie found herself explaining quantum sensor technology to people who barely understood conventional systems, how she had tracked hundreds of enemy ships simultaneously, how the advanced arrays had given them seconds of warning that made all the difference, how information flowed faster than human brains could process it. The admirals listened with expressions that mixed awe and confusion. They understood enough to know this was revolutionary, not enough to fully grasp how revolutionary. Martin spent hours with Earth's top engineers walking them through every system on the Defiant. The quantum drive required exotic materials and precision manufacturing. The shielding generators operated at temperatures that would melt conventional alloys. The weapons array needed processing power that strained even the most advanced computers. None of it was easy. All of it was necessary. The engineers took notes and asked endless questions. How long between maintenance cycles? What were the failure points? Could production be scaled up? Martin answered what he could and admitted what he did not know. The Defiant had been pushed beyond its design specs. Some systems had performed better than expected. Others had revealed weaknesses that needed addressing. Chris briefed the navigation teams on flying with a quantum drive, the maneuvers that had saved them in combat, the calculations needed in real time, the trust required to push the ship beyond what seemed physically possible. He emphasized that the drive was not just about speed. It was about positioning, being where the enemy did not expect, moving in ways that conventional tactics could not counter. The navigators listened and tried to imagine flying something that powerful. Most of them looked terrified at the prospect. Danny's presentation on the adaptive weapons array attracted the largest audience. Everyone wanted to understand the AI that had learned to fight during combat, how it analyzed targets, how it coordinated multiple weapon systems, how it had essentially become a tactical officer in its own right. The weapons experts asked if it was safe. Could the AI be trusted? What if it made decisions humans disagreed with? Danny explained that the system was not independent. It enhanced human capabilities rather than replacing them. But yes, it was powerful. Maybe more powerful than they had fully realized. Lisa's diplomatic briefing focused on galactic reactions to the battle. The species that saw opportunity. The ones that saw threat. The careful dance of politics that would determine humanity's place in the larger community. She emphasized that military victory was only the beginning. Now came the harder work of building relationships and establishing humanity as more than just another aggressive species with advanced weapons. The diplomats took her warning seriously. Some of them understood that winning a battle could be easier than winning the peace. Earth's leadership held emergency sessions to discuss what came next. Build more Defiants, obviously, but how many? How fast? At what cost? The resources required for each ship were enormous. The training pipeline for crews would take years to establish. They could not just throw money at the problem and expect instant results. Some argued for a massive military buildup, project strength, deter any potential threats, show the galaxy that humanity could defend itself and its interests. Others cautioned against appearing too aggressive. The Kaldrith were not the only threat. Making enemies unnecessarily could isolate Earth diplomatically. Balance was needed, strength without arrogance, capability without intimidation. Jake was asked to speak to the assembled leadership, admirals and generals and politicians who would decide humanity's path forward. He stood before them still wearing his uniform from the battle, still exhausted from days of debriefings. He told them what he believed. The Defiant proved that humanity could compete militarily at the highest level. But one ship was not enough. Not against an empire that numbered thousands of vessels. Not against a galaxy full of species with their own agendas and ambitions. Earth needed a fleet. Not just for defense but for presence. To show that humans were serious. To deter aggression before it started. But more importantly, Earth needed alliances. The Kaldrith had expanded for decades because they fought their enemies one at a time. Isolated them. Overwhelmed them. Humanity could not afford to stand alone. The species reaching out with offers of cooperation were potential partners against common threats. Those partnerships needed to be taken seriously. The leadership listened and asked hard questions. Could they trust alien species? Could they share technology without losing their advantage? Could they build alliances without compromising human interests? Jake admitted he did not have all the answers. He was a ship commander, not a diplomat, but he knew one thing with certainty. Isolation would lead to the same fate that had befallen 17 other species. The Kaldrith would come eventually. Next time, with more ships and better tactics, humanity needed to be ready with more than just superior technology. They needed friends. The weeks that followed were chaotic. Earth's shipyards began construction on 6 new Defiant-class warships, modified designs incorporating lessons from the prototype's battle. Recruitment centers were overwhelmed with volunteers wanting to crew the new vessels. Everyone wanted to be part of humanity's expansion into the stars. Everyone wanted to prove themselves worthy of the legacy the first crew had created. Sophie was promoted and assigned to train the next generation of sensor operators.